Maybe after the Industrial Revolution, this is the biggest thing. But at the same time, I'm a little grounded in the fact that this is still early innings. If you're a model company, you may have a winner's curse. You may have done all the hard work, done unbelievable innovation, except it's kind of like one copy away from that being commoditized. We didn't want to just be a hoster for one company and have just a massive book of business with one customer. That's not a business. Our business, which today is an end-user tools business, will become essentially an infrastructure business in support of agents doing work. The thing that you have to think through is not what you do in the next 5 years, but what do you do for the next 50.
Okay, so Microsoft's CEO Satya Nadella just had a deep 2-hour-long conversation about AGI. He not only shares Microsoft's AI strategy, but also gives profound assessments of the AI market and the US-China AI race. So let's pull out the most important insights from this and unveil what they really mean. And it all starts with one question. How do Satya and Microsoft actually think about AI at its core?
I start with the excitement that I also feel for maybe after the Industrial Revolution, this is the biggest thing. And so therefore, I start with that premise. But at the same time, I'm a little grounded in the fact that this is still early innings. We've built some very useful things. We're seeing some great properties. These scaling laws seem to be working. And I'm optimistic that they'll continue to work, right? Some of it is, it does require real science breakthroughs, but it's also a lot of engineering and what have you. But that said, I also sort of take the view that, even what has been happening in the last 70 years of computing has also been a march that has helped us move as I said, I like one of the things that Raj Reddy has as a metaphor for what AI is, right? He's a Turing Award winner out of CMU. And he had this even pre-AGI, but he had this metaphor of AI should either be a guardian angel or a cognitive amplifier. I love that. It's a simple way to think about what this is. Ultimately, what is its human utility? It is going to be a cognitive amplifier and a guardian angel. And so if I sort of view it that way, I view it as a tool. But then you can also go very mystical about it and say, wow, this is more than a tool. It does all these things which only humans did so far. But that has been the case with many technologies in the past. Only humans did a lot of things, and then we had tools that did them.
So in his framing, AI is primarily a tool that amplifies human cognition and protects people, even if some people talk about it almost mystically. But then Satya shifted it to a bigger picture with previous tech waves example.
In some sense, this goes back again to essentially what's the economic growth picture going to really look like? What's the firm going to look like? What's productivity going to look like? And that to me is where, again, if the Industrial Revolution created, after 70 years of diffusion is when you started seeing the economic growth, right? That's the other thing to remember is even if the tech is diffusing fast this time around, for true economic growth to appear, it has to sort of diffuse to a point where the work artifact and the workflow has to change. And so that's kind of one place where I think the change management required for a corporation to truly change, I think, is something we shouldn't discount. So I think going forward, do humans and the tokens they produce get higher leverage, right? Whether it's the Dwarkesh or the Dylan tokens of the future. I mean, think about the amount of technology. Would you be able to run semi-analysis or this podcast without technology? No chance, right? I mean, the scale that you have been able to achieve, no chance. So the question is, what's that scale? Is it going to be 10x'd with something that comes through? Absolutely. And therefore, with your ramp to some revenue number or your ramp to some audience number or what have you. And so that, I think, is what's going to happen, right? I mean, the point is, that's what took 70 years, maybe 150 years for the Industrial Revolution may happen in 20 years, 25 years. That's a better way to, I would love to compress what happened in 200 years of the Industrial Revolution into 20-year period, if you're lucky.
Well, if AI really can compress 200 years of economic change into just a couple of decades, then the next big question is simple. How does the business model keep up? Who pays for all this intelligence, and what does that look like in the real world of software and cloud? From here, Satya shifted from big picture growth to the nuts and bolts of SaaS, subscriptions, and how AI is already rewriting Microsoft's economics.
The business models themselves, I think the levers are going to remain similar, right? Which is, if I look at if you look at the menu of models, starting from, like, say, consumer all the way, right? There will be some ad unit, there will be some transaction, there will be some device gross margin for somebody who builds an AI device. There will be subscriptions, consumer and enterprise, and then there'll be consumption, right? So I still think that that's kind of how those are all the meters. To your point, what is a subscription? Up to now, people like subscriptions because they can budget for them, right? They are essentially entitlements to some consumption rights that come encapsulated in a subscription. So that, I think, is what, in some sense, it becomes a pricing decision. So how much consumption you are entitled to is, if you look at all the coding subscriptions, that's kind of what they are, right? And you kind of have the pro tier, the standard tier, and what have you. And so I think that's how the pricing will, and the margin structures will get tiered. The interesting thing is, having at Microsoft, the good news for us is we kind of are in that business across all those meters. In fact, as a portfolio level, we pretty much have consumption, subscriptions, to all of the other consumer levers as well. And then I think time will tell which of these models make sense in what categories. One thing on the SaaS side, since you brought up, which I think a lot about, is take Office 365 or Microsoft 365. I mean, man, having a low ARPU is great, because here's an interesting thing, right? During the transition from server to cloud, one of the questions we used to ask ourselves is, oh my God, if all we did was just basically move the same users who were using, let's call it, our Office licenses and our servers at that time, Office servers, right, to the cloud, and we had COGS, this is going to basically not only shrink our margins, but we'll be fundamentally an less profitable company. Except what happened was the move to the cloud expanded the market like crazy. Right? I mean, we sold a few servers in India, didn't sell much. Whereas in the cloud, suddenly everybody in India also could afford fractionally buying servers. The IT costs, in fact, the biggest thing I had not realized, for example, was the amount of money people were spending buying storage underneath SharePoint. In fact, EMC's biggest segment may have been storage servers for SharePoint. All that sort of dropped in the cloud because nobody had to go buy. In fact, it was working capital. Basically, it is cash flow out, right? And so it expanded the market massively. So this AI thing will be that, right? So if you take coding, what we built with GitHub and VS Code in over decades, suddenly the coding assistant is that big in 1 year. And so that, I think, is what's going to happen as well, which is the market expands massively.
If AI is rewriting the basic economics of software, the clearest place to see it is where builders actually live, inside their code editors. So then, Satya zooms in on the AI coding war around Copilot and its rivals, and how this crowded battlefield is actually proof that the whole market is exploding.
I love this chart. I love this chart for so many reasons. One is we're still on the top. Second is all these companies that are listed here are all companies that have been born in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
That, to me, is the best sign, right? Which is, if you have new competitors, new existential problems, when you say, man, who's it now? Oh, Claude's going to kill you. Cursor is going to kill you.
Yeah.
It's not Borland, right? So thank God. That means we are in the right direction. But this is it, right? The fact that we went from nothing to this scale is the market expansion. So this is like the cloud-like stuff. This fundamentally, this category of coding and AI is probably going to be one of the biggest categories, right? It is a software factory category. In fact, it may be bigger than knowledge work.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to keep myself open-minded about, we're going to have tough competition. I think that's your point, which I think is a great one. But man, I'm glad we parlayed what we had into this. And now we have to compete. And so in the compete side, even in the last quarter, we did our quarterly announcement. I think we grew from 20 to 26 million subs, right? So I feel good about our sub growth and where the direction of travel on that is. But The more interesting thing that has happened is, guess where all the repos of all these other guys who are generating lots and lots of code go to? They go to GitHub. So GitHub is at an all-time high in terms of repo creation, PRs, everything. So that, in some sense, we want to keep that open, by the way. That means we want to have that, right? Because we don't want to conflate that with our own growth, right? Interestingly enough, we're getting one developer joining GitHub a second or something. That is the stat, I think. And then 80% of them just fall into some GitHub Copilot workflow, just because there are. And by the way, many of these things will even use some of our code review agents, which are by default on, just because you can use it. So we'll have many, many structural shots at this. The thing that we're also going to do is what we did with Git, the primitives of GitHub, whether starting with Git, to issues, to actions. These are powerful, lovely things because they kind of are all built around your repo. So we want to extend that. Last week at GitHub Universe, that's kind of what we did, right? So we said Agent HQ was the conceptual thing that we said we were going to build out. This is where, for example, you have a thing called mission control. And you go to mission control, and now I can fire off. Sometimes I describe it as the cable TV of all these AI agents, because I'll have essentially packaged into one subscription Codex, Claude, cognition stuff, anyone's agents, Grok, all of them will be there. So I get one package, and then I can literally go issue a task, steer them. So they will all be working in their independent branches. I can monitor them. So I literally have, because I think that's going to be one of the biggest places of innovation, right? Because right now, I want to be able to use multiple agents. I want to be able to then digest the output of the multiple agents. I want to be able to then keep a handle on my repo. So if there's some kind of a heads-up display that needs to be built, and then for me to quickly steer and triage what the coding agents have generated. That, to me, between VS Code, GitHub, and all of these new primitives we will build as mission control, I think with a control plane, observability, I mean, think about everyone who's going to deploy all this will require a whole host of observability of what agent did what, at what time, to what code base. So I feel that's the opportunity. And at the end of the day, your point is well taken, which is we better be competitive and innovate. And if we don't, yes, we will get toppled. But I like the chart, at least as long as we're on the top, even with competition. There's no birthright here that we should have any confidence other than to say, hey, we should go innovate. And knowing the lucky break we have, in some sense, is that this category is going to be a lot bigger than anything we had high share in. Let me say it that way, right? In some sense, you could say, man, we kind of had high share in VS Code. We had high share in the repos with GitHub. And that was a good market. But the point is, even having a decent share in what is a much more expansive market, right? I mean, you could say we had a high share in client-server computing. We have much lower share than that in hyperscale. But is it a much bigger business? By orders of magnitude. So at least there's existence proof that Microsoft has been okay, even if our share position has not been as strong as it was, as long as the markets we are competing in are creating more value, and there are multiple winners. So I think that's the stuff. But I take your point that ultimately it all means you have to get competitive. So I watch that every quarter. And so that's why I think I'm very optimistic that what we're going to do with GitHub HQ or Agent HQ, turning GitHub into a place where all these agents come. As I said, we'll have multiple shots on goal on there, right? It need not be that, hey, some of these guys can succeed along with us. And so it doesn't need to be just one winner and one subscription.
Satya's basically saying the real battle might not be over who has the smartest model, but over who builds the smartest system around it. The tools, the data, the orchestration layer. To make that idea real, he zooms out from abstract market charts and drops into the thing we all knows, Excel.
Perhaps a few years ago, people were saying, oh, I can just wrap a model and build a successful company. And that, I think, is probably gotten debunked just because the model capabilities and with tools used in particular. But the interesting thing is there's no, like when I look at Office 365, let's take even this little thing we built called Excel Agent. It's interesting, right? Excel Agent is not a UI level wrapper. It's actually a model that is in the middle tier. In this case, because we have all the IP from the GPT family, we are taking that and putting it into the core middle tier of the Office system to both teach it what it means to natively understand Excel, everything in it. So it's not just, hey, I just have a pixel level understanding. I have a full understanding of all the native artifacts of Excel. Both when I see it, like, because if you think about it, if I'm going to give it some reasoning task, right, I need to even fix the reasoning mistakes I make. And so that means I need to both not just see the pixels, I need to be able to see, oh, I got that formula wrong, and I need to understand that. And then, so to some degree, that's all being done not at the UI wrapper level with some prompt, but it's being done in the middle tier by teaching it all the tools of Excel, right? So I'm giving it even essentially a markdown to teach it the skills of what it means to be a sophisticated Excel user. So it's a weird thing that it goes back a little bit to AI brain, right? Which is you're building not just Excel, you are now business logic in its traditional sense. You're taking the Excel business logic in the traditional sense and wrapping essentially a cognitive layer to it using this model, which knows how to use the tool. So in some sense, Excel will come with an analyst bundled in, and with all the tools used. That's the type of stuff that'll get built by everybody. So even for the model companies, they'll have to compete, right? So if they price stuff high, guess what? If I'm a builder of a tool like this, I'll substitute you. I may use you for a while. And so as long as there's competition, there's always a winner-take-all thing, right? If there's going to be one model that is better than everybody else with massive distance, yes, that's a winner-take-all. As long as there's going to be competition where there's multiple models, just like hyperscale competition, and there's an open source check, there is enough room here to go build value on top of models. But at Microsoft, the way I look at it and say is, we are going to be in the hyperscale business, which will support multiple models. We will have access to OpenAI models for 7 more years, which we will innovate on top of. So royalty, essentially, I think of ourselves as having a frontier class model that we can use and innovate on with full flexibility. And we'll build our own models with MAI. And so we will always have a model level. And then we'll build these, whether it's in security, whether it's in knowledge work, whether it's in coding or in science, we will build our own application scaffolding, which will be model forward, right? It won't be a wrapper on a model, but the model will be wrapped into the application.
When you put it that way, Excel with an analyst built inside is more than a clever feature. It is a preview of the future where software itself shows up as a coworker that log in, move across apps, and get real work done on their own. And here's where things get even more interesting.
The future of the company would be the tools business, which I have a computer.
Yeah.
I use Excel. And in fact, in the future, I'll even have a co-pilot.
Right.
And that co-pilot will also have agents, right? That's still, it's still me steering everything.
Yeah.
And everything is coming back. So that's kind of one world.
Yeah.
Then the second world is the company just literally provisions a computing resource for an AI agent.
Yeah.
And that is working fully autonomously.
Yeah.
That fully autonomous agent will have essentially embodied set of those same tools
Right.
that are available to it, right? So this AI tool that comes in also has not just a raw computer, because it's going to be more token efficient to use tools to get stuff done. In fact, I kind of look at it and say our business, which today is an end-user tools business, will become essentially an infrastructure business in support of agents doing work. Is another way to think about it, right? So if one of the things that you'll see us do, in fact, like all the stuff we built underneath M365 still is going to be very relevant. You need some place to store it, some place to do archival, some place to do discovery, some place to manage all of these activities, even if you're an AI agent. So it's kind of a new infrastructure. Like what happened is we had servers, then there was virtualization, and they had many more servers. So that's another way to think about this, which is, hey, don't think of the tool as the end thing. What is the entire substrate underneath that tool that humans use? And that entire substrate is the bootstrap for the AI agent as well, because the AI agent needs a computer. That's kind of one. So in fact, one of the fascinating things we're seeing a significant amount of growth is all these guys who are doing these office artifacts and what have you as autonomous agents and so on want to provision Windows 365, right? They really want to be able to provision a computer for these agents. And so absolutely. And that's where I think we're going to have essentially an end user computing infrastructure business, which I think is going to just keep growing, because guess what? It's going to grow faster than the number of users. So in fact, that's kind of one of the other questions people ask me is, hey, what happens to the per user business? At least the early signs may be the way to think about the per user business is not just per user, it's per agent. And if you sort of say it's per user and per agent, the key is what's the stuff to provision for every agent? A computer, a set of security things around it, an identity around it, and all those things are observability and so on are the management layers. And that's, I think, all going to get baked into that.
You know what? This strategy will surely be a game changer for Microsoft, because it is no longer only about how many human seats they sell, but how many AI seats it will quietly be powering in the background, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's a fortune right there.
There can be a real new efficient frontier where it's just agents working with agents and completely optimizing. Mm-hmm. And even when agents are working with agents, what are the primitives that are needed? Do you need a storage system? Does that storage system need to have e-discovery? Does that e-discovery, do you need to have observability? Do you need to have an identity system that is going to use multiple models with all having one identity system? So these are all the core underlying rails we have today for what are office systems or what have you. And that's what I think we will have in the future as well. You talked about databases, right? I mean, I would love all of Excel to have a database backend, right? In fact, I would love for all that to happen immediately. And that database is a good database. I mean, databases, in fact, will be a big thing that'll grow. In fact, if I think about all of the Office artifacts being structured better, the ability to do the joins between structured and unstructured better because of the agenting work, that'll grow the underlying what is infrastructure business. It happens, the consumption of that is all being driven by agents. You could say all that is just-in-time generated software by a model company. That could also be true. If we will be one such model company too. And so we will build in, so the competition could be that we will build a model plus all the infrastructure and provision it, and then there will be competition between a bunch of those folks who can do that.
So the plan sounds simple. Build both model and infrastructure and provision it all. But did you remember the recent mega deal which led Microsoft to receive a 27% ownership stake in OpenAI and extends its rights to OpenAI's models until 2023? Here's the crystal clear explanation from Satya about this.
So first of all, we are absolutely going to use the OpenAI models to the maximum across all of our products, right? I mean, that's, I think, the core thing that we're going to continue to do all the way for the next 7 years. And not just use it, but then add value to it. That's kind of where the analyst and this Excel agent, and these are all things that we will do where, we'll do RL fine-tuning, we'll do some mid-training runs on top of a GPT family where we have unique data assets and build capability. The MAI model, the way I think we're going to think about it is the good news here, in fact, with the new agreement is even we can be very, very clear that we're going to build a world-class superintelligence team and go after it with a high ambition. But at the same time, we're also going to use this time to be smart about how to use both these things. So that means we will, on one end, be very product-focused, on the other end, be very research-focused. In other words, because we have access to the GPT family. The last thing I don't want to do is use my flops in a way that is just duplicative and doesn't add much value. So I want to be able to take the flops that we use to generate a GPT family and maximize its value, while my MAI flops are being used for, let's take the image model that we launched, which I think this launched, is a number 9 in the image arena. We're using it, both for cost optimization. It's on Copilot, it's in Bing, and we're going to use that. We have a audio model in Copilot, which it's got personality and what have you. We optimized it for our product. So we will do those. Even on the LM arena, we started on the text one. I think it debuted at night 13. And by the way, it was done only on whatever 15,000 H100s, and so it was a very small model. And so it was again to prove out the core capability, the instruction following, and everything else, which we wanted to make sure we can match what was state of the art. And so that shows us, given scaling laws, what we are capable of doing if it gave more flops to it, right? So the next thing we will do is an omni model where we will take sort of the work we've done in audio, what we have done in image, and what we have done in text. That'll be the next pit stop on the MAI side. So when I think about the MAI roadmap, we're going to build a first-class superintelligence team. We're going to continue to drop and do in the open some of these models. They will either be in our products being used because they're going to be latency-friendly, COGS-friendly, or what have you, or they'll have some special capability. And we will do real research in order to be ready for some next 5, 6, 7, 8 breakthroughs that are all needed on this march towards superintelligence. So I think and while exploiting the advantage we have of having the GPT family that we can work on top of as well. We are going to build the infrastructure that'll support multiple models. Because from a hyperscale perspective, we want to build the most scaled infrastructure fleet that's capable of supporting all the models the world needs, whether it's from open source or whether it's obviously from OpenAI and others. And so that's kind of one job. Second is in our own model capability, we will absolutely use the OpenAI model in our products, and we'll start building our own models. And we may, like in GitHub Copilot, Anthropic is used. So we will even have other frontier models that are going to be wrapped into our products as well. So I think that that's kind of how, at least each time, at the end of the day, the eval of the product as it meets a particular task or a job is what matters. And we'll sort of back from there into the vertical integration needed, knowing that as long as you're serving the market well with the product, you can always cost optimize. The thing that is the biggest competitor for any new accelerator is kind of even the previous generation of NVIDIA, right? I mean, in a fleet, what I'm going to look at is the overall TCO. So the bar I have even for our own, and which, by the way, I was just looking at the data for Maya 200, which looks great, except that one of the things that we learned even on the compute side, right, which is we had a lot of Intel, then we introduced AMD, and then we introduced Cobalt. And so that's kind of how we scaled it. And so we have good sort of existence proof of, at least in core compute, on how to build your own silicon and then manage a fleet where all three are at play in some balance. Because, by the way, even Google's buying NVIDIA, and so is Amazon. It makes sense because NVIDIA is innovating and it's the general purpose thing. All models run on it, and customer demand is there. Because if you build your own vertical thing, you better have your own model, which is either going to use it for training or inference, and you have to generate your own demand for it or subsidize the demand for it. So therefore, you want to make sure you scale it appropriately. So the way we are going to go do it is have a closed loop between our own MAI models and our silicon, because I feel like that's what gives you the birthright to really do your own silicon, right? Where you literally have designed the microarchitecture with what you're doing, and then you keep pace with your own models. In our case, the good news here is OpenAI has a program which we have access to. Microsoft wants to be a fantastic, I'll call it, speed of light execution partner for NVIDIA, because quite frankly, that fleet is life itself. I'm not worried about, obviously Jensen's doing super well with his margins, but the TCO has many dimensions to it, and I want to be great at that TCO. On top of that, I want to be able to sort of really work with the OpenAI lineage and the MAI lineage and the system design, knowing that we have the IP rights on both ends.
Okay, we all know Satya is one of the sharpest strategists in tech, so let's hear what he thinks about the AI market, which many believe is in a massive valuation bubble, and also the intense AI race between the US and China.
In the marketplace, right, there's all kinds of incentives right now, and rightfully so, right? I mean, what do you expect an independent lab that is sort of trying to raise money to do, right? They have to put some numbers out there such that they can actually go raise money so that they can pay their bills for compute and what have you. And it's a good thing. I mean, someone's going to take some risk and put it in there, and they've shown traction. It's not like it's all risk without seeing the fact that they've been performing, whether it's OpenAI, whether it's Anthropic. So I feel great about what they've done. And we have a massive book of business with these chaps. So therefore, that's all good. But overall, ultimately, there's two simple things. One is you got to allocate for R&D. You brought up even talent. You got to, like, the talent for AI is at a premium. You got to spend there. You got to spend on compute. So in some sense, researcher to GPU ratios have to be high. That is sort of what it takes to be a leading R&D company in this world. And that's something that needs to scale. And you have to have a balance sheet that allows you to scale that long before it's conventional wisdom and so on. So that's kind of one thing. But the other is all about sort of knowing how to forecast. I think that the key priority for the US tech sector and the US government is to ensure that we not only do leading innovative work, but we also collectively build trust around the world on our tech stack, right? Because I always say the United States is just an unbelievable place. It's just unique in history, right? It's 4% of the world's population, 25% of the GDP, and 50% of the market cap. And I think you should think about those ratios and really and reflect on it. That 50% happens because, quite frankly, the trust the world has in the United States, whether it's its capital markets or whether it's its technology and its stewardship of what matters at any given time in terms of leading sector. So if that is broken, then that's not a good day for the United States. And so if we start with that, which I think President Trump gets, the White House, David Sachs, everyone really, I think, gets it. And so therefore, I applaud anything that the United States government and the tech sector jointly does to, quite frankly, for example, put our own capital at risk collectively as an industry in every part of the world, right? So I would like, in fact, the USG to take credit for foreign direct investment by American companies all over the world, right? It's kind of like least talked about. But the best marketing that the United States should be doing is, it's not just about all the foreign direct investment coming into the United States, but the most leading sector, which is these AI factories, are all being created all over the world. By whom? By America and American companies. And so you start there, and then you even build other agreements around it, which are around their continuity, their legitimate sovereignty concerns around whether it's data residency, whether it's even what happens for them to have real agency and guarantees on privacy and so on. And so that, in fact, our European commitments, I think, are worth reading, right? So we made a series of commitments to Europe on how we will really govern our hyperscale investment there, such that really European Union and the European countries have sovereignty. We're also building sovereign clouds in France and in Germany. We have something called sovereign services on Azure, which literally give people key management services along with confidential computing, including confidential computing in GPUs, which we have done great innovative work with NVIDIA. And so I feel very, very good about being able to build both technically and through policy this trust in the American tech stack. Any nation state, including the United States, at this point will do what it takes to be more self-sufficient on some of these critical supply chains. So I, as a multinational company, have to think about that as a first-class requirement, right? If I don't, then I'm not respecting what is in the sort of policy interests of that country long-term, right? And I'm not saying they won't make practical decisions in the short term, right? Absolutely. I mean, the globalization can't just be rewound, right? I mean, all these capital investments cannot be made in a way at the pace at which. But at the same time, you have to kind of, like, if you think about it, right? If somebody showed up in Washington and said, hey, you know what? We're not going to build any semiconductor plants, they're going to be kicked out of the United States. And the same thing is going to be true in every other country too. And so therefore, I think we have to, as companies, respect what the lessons learned are, whether it's, you could say the pandemic woke us up or whatever, but nevertheless, people are saying, look, globalization was fantastic. It helped the supply chains be globalized and be super efficient, but there's such a thing called resilience, and we are happy, we want resilience, and so therefore that feature will get built. At what pace, I think is the point you're making. It can't be like you can't snap your fingers and say all the TSMC plants now are all in Arizona and with all of the capability. They're not going to be. But is there a plan? There will be a plan. And should we respect that? Absolutely. And so I feel that's the world. I want to meet the world where it is and what it wants to do going forward, as opposed to say, hey, we have a point of view that doesn't respect your view. Trust in American tech is probably the most important feature. It's not even the model capability, maybe. It is like, can I trust you, the company? Can I trust you, your country, and its institutions to be a long-term supplier? May be the thing that wins the world.
Overall, the real test won't be which company builds the biggest model, but whether we build the institutions, norms, and engineering scaffolding that let those models amplify human judgment instead of erode it. The most important work will be stitching together trusted infrastructure, clear incentives, and guardrails. So AI becomes a force multiplier for creativity, meaningful jobs, and shared prosperity. If we get that right, the next decades could be the era when tools finally raise what people can do, not what we must accept. That's all for today. Stay tuned for our next episode of Path to Superintelligence podcast. Thanks for watching.